But to start with my life, I'd like to start with a word of prayer. Lord, I thank you for this opportunity to glorify you, O God. It's not anything about me. It's about you, O Lord, what you have done into the life of one of your servants. Lord, I pray that I may glorify your name and that I may be nothing compared to what you have done. Now I ask you to bless this, that it may touch people's souls and their lives. I pray this in Jesus' precious name. Amen. Okay. My life started when I was going to visit my neighbor next door, and all of a sudden there was a very attractive young girl that was standing on the porch next to him, next to his house. So of course I walked over to see her, and all of a sudden I realized that's the same Nancy that I used to play with as kids. She's grown up to be a young lady. And so we started talking a little bit and things like this. So I cut around to the point I said to her, "You think you would go out with me sometime?" And she says, "I can't. My dad wouldn't let me." I thought what a narrow-minded person that was. So anyway, we got to talking a little bit, and she says, "My oldest brother met a wonderful Christian woman, and they went together for a while and finally got married, and he joined the church, and Holy Spirit worked in his life and changed him." So she said to me, "Why don't you go to church with your brother?" And I thought, if I could get a date with her, why not? So that's how it got started. So I started going to church there regularly. One Sunday evening, as I was sitting there, my brother and sister-in-law didn't go with me that evening, but all of a sudden the minister was preaching, and I don't remember what he said, but all of a sudden the Holy Spirit took a hold of me and said, "Yes, you are a sinner." I knew nothing about catechism. I knew nothing about any of the church rules or anything else. All I knew is that the Holy Spirit touched me right then and made me realize that I needed Him. I needed Jesus Christ in my life. So that's how my life got started. And then to go on with it, besides that, I never did get a date with Nancy. But I was drafted into the Army shortly after that, and went through all the military stuff, the training that you have to go through. And then on the bulletin board when we got done, the names were there where you were going to go, and my name said overseas, and the person right below me said Chicago, 5th Army Headquarters. So I thought, that'd be good. I'd see some of the world. And then it happens that when the final orders came out, mine said 5th Army Headquarters, and his said overseas. So he went to Japan, and I went to Chicago. And in Chicago there, I worked as an MP. We went different things around and things like this. I wrote trains to check passes and things like this. But then the colonel's driver was retiring, and they needed a new driver for him. So they selected me to drive for him. Well, the thing is, I had every weekend off that way because he didn't work on the weekends and he didn't need me. So I finally bought a car, and I would drive home weekends because it was only a little over 200 miles to go home. So that way I could attend my own church again. Well, attending that church, I met a young lady by the name of Gloria, and when I got out of the service, we dated for about a year and got married. And we were married for about 6 years. And she sang in the choir, and Sandy sang in the choir, and sat right next to each other because they both were altos. So that's how the relationship was there. But anyway, she was going to go visit her sister in Granville, and it was the day before Christmas, and she had that accident where she was killed in that automobile accident. And here I was left with 2 boys that were 2 and 4, and the minister came to where I was working to tell me that, and you can't hardly believe it. I mean, it's something that, it just don't happen that way. You say goodbye in the morning and say you'd see them because we'd only go to work a half a day before Christmas, and I'll be home, and there was no one there. So anyway, after that, I was our youth director at Standale Reformed Church. Gloria and I was youth director. And I said to the pastor, there's no longer I can do this alone. And he says, well, I understand that. And he says, but just think about it a little bit. So I said, no, there's no way I can. So about a week or 2 later, he came to me and he says, what if I find you a helper? And I said, well, I'll think about it. But I got 2 boys to take care of, remember? And he said, I understand that. So anyway, we got to talking a little bit, and I said, I'll think about it. So as the time went on, he says, what did you decide? I says, well, we'll try it once. And who was that helper? Sandy. Could you believe it? And of course, she was a beautiful young lady, and here I was, a widower with 2 boys, and she wouldn't be interested in that at all. So we worked together, and she was going to college at Michigan State, and she ran out of money, and she had to come back home, and see, this is another one of God's directions here, because her running out of money, and she decided she's going to go to junior college for a year. She was here at Standale Church then, where she could be with me. So we worked together and things like this. And the kids in the youth group said that in the summertime, why don't we go to the beach? And I said, that sounds good. So I said that to Sandy, and she says, I'm sorry, but I got to work that Saturday. I can't go to the beach. And one of the kids says, well, my sister works there at Myers where you work. Maybe you can trade with her for a day. And that's what happened. They traded, and so we went to the beach. And actually, that was kind of our first date. So from then on, it progressed, and I would pick her up from work when she'd get out of work. She worked at Myers, and I'd pick her up, and we'd go and get a sandwich or a cup of tea or something, and then I'd take her home. Well, this went on, and finally, I never dreamed that such a beautiful girl would marry somebody, a widower with 2 kids. And so I asked her if she would consider it. And she said, I would love to, but you got to ask my dad first. The old-fashioned way, you know. So I asked him, and he says, "No, you're too old for her." I said, "Okay." And then he talked to me a little bit, and he says, "Well, you're a fine Christian man. I guess it's all right." So that's how we got together, and we got married the following March, and we were married for 60 years, minus 4 days. But then and you see how God directed that and made her realize that she, going to junior college, it gave her the opportunity to work with me and for me to have her work with her. And, you know, our kids have been so great with me now after she passed away that they do almost anything for me. Like my daughter-in-law, Deb, she makes sure that when I have to go to the doctor, she goes with me so that she can hear what the doctor says and quite often writes it down for me to remember. So my kids have been outstanding, every one of them. My son in Texas calls me every Friday on the phone, and my daughter that lives in Arizona, she calls me a couple times a week. And the 3 kids that are here, they contact me regularly. My son Tim and Carol, they invite me over for supper every Monday night. I mean, I got to say that, yeah, who raised those kids that way but Sandy? Sandy did this because she was with them most of the time. And being such a beautiful person, and she was beautiful inside as well as outside. I mean, she was always helping, always wanted to do things for people. This was her way of life. So to have a person like this as a wife is just outstanding, you know. It's just, and somebody says, how do you last 60 years of marriage? I said, the first thing you got to have is God in your life. And the second thing is you got to think more of her than you do of yourself, because that's the way it is supposed to be. So that's how our life went and things like this. So anyway, then when when Sandy was diagnosed with Alzheimer's about 7 years ago, she didn't show a whole lot of symptoms, but about 3 years later she started falling and she couldn't remember things and just kind of got worse, her ability to do things. So I talked it over with the kids and I said, do you think it's time for us to put her into a rest home? And they said, well, yes. So I went to the Christian rest home and I talked to the director there, which usually takes 3 to 6 months to get in there because they always have reservations. And she says, we happen to have a room right now. You see, God planned all these things. And so anyway, we put her in the rest home, and she was upset with me a little bit about it because she wanted to be home. But then I went to the doctor because I was having problems with my foot, and he sent me to have a MRI, what is it, Deb? Ultrasound on my leg there. And so he's there, and I went to Blodgett Hospital, and he says, he read the ultrasound, he says, it isn't clear. He says, I want you to go to Rockford Urgent Care because they got newer equipment maybe they'll find something there. So I went to urgent care, and they made an ultrasound of that leg, and they called me the next morning and said, I want you to go to Butterworth Spectrum emergency immediately. So, what's some words? This can't be that bad. So I went there, and remember now, just 2 days before this, Sandy was put in the home, so we didn't have anybody to take care of her if she would have been home. So this is how God planned this. So there was someone there that could take care of her. So anyway, I had that ultrasound, and I went to the hospital there. Next thing I know, I woke up in a room, and the doctor came in and kind of joked with me a little bit and said, well, you know, we found a blood clot in your leg, and that blood clot has been there for decades. And he says, I got most of it out of there. He said, but there's a couple of little ones there that I couldn't get out, that there, because my toes have always been cold for years. This foot has always been cold. Well, now it's worse than that. It's numb. I mean, it feels like you got a club there, and you don't have the feeling there. That's why I don't have the balance. But so anyway, I was in the hospital for 5 days, and then they sent me to therapy. So I was in therapy for another 10 days to teach me how to walk again on that foot. So in the meantime, Sandy was at the rest home being taken care of. And so that's how I feel that God has directed my whole life through this, how he always was there, always prepared to make sure that the things in my life worked out according to his will and not mine. So I'm just so grateful to have the family that I have that support me. I'm grateful that God came into my life. And, you know, as Nancy said to me, why don't you go with your brother to church? What a witness this is for her, how God used just those little things to change a life. So, you know, we realize that sometimes some of the small things that we do, that we don't even realize we're doing it, God uses to change lives. And this is what is so exciting about being a Christian, following God's leadings through your whole life. And I'm sure that anybody can look back at their life and they can see how God has directed them into different ways that you don't realize until you stop and look and see some of the things that happen in your life. At 92 years old, I can look back at my life and I can say, God has blessed it all the way through. There's nothing in my life that has been that I have accomplished. It's all been God. So I thank you so much for this time. Like my brothers said to me, you know, you're the one who brought us to church, my two brothers. And we had 5 children in my siblings in my family. And all 5 of them that never went to church became Christians. Now, isn't this amazing how God changes people's lives? Not just through my life, but through what God has planned for, like my brother, my oldest brother, what he did for me. Oh, and another thing I got to tell about that I missed is that after Gloria's accident, my brother and sister-in-law invited my 2 boys to live with them. They had a boy that was just a couple months or a month or so older than what my oldest son was. And so they were roommates there. And my youngest son, of course, almost like called her mama, because she was that type of a person, just a wonderful, wonderful woman. And so that's one of the things that how God's just used family like this to do it, because they were staying at my mother and dad's house, and my mother and dad was older, and I could see that was just too hard for them. So that's why they volunteered to do that. Oh, he started going to church when he met his wife, and so, and she was a wonderful woman. She was very touching, but that's how he started going to church. And Arlene, my mother wanted to go to church, so Arlene started taking her to church, and that's how she became a Christian, taking her to church. So and my two younger brothers, I brought them to church with me, and they became Christian. They married wonderful Christian women. So, you know, the amazing part about it to me is, and now some people say these are coincidences. They aren't coincidence. They're all God-taken and God-led. My two younger brothers, they said, you know, we would never have known who Jesus Christ was if you didn't bring us to church. So these are the things that God has us do as witnesses. And I had the wonderful experience of going on mission trips and things like this. I've been to Nicaragua, and I've been to Haiti, and I've been to Kenya. All these things was just exciting for me to be able to be a witness and to be there, go to these places. So anybody that has a chance to witness for God, please do so, because He's the one who brings us to where we are.
One more story, Dad. Tell them about Olaf.
Oh, oh yes, that's a story in itself. We had a sailboat in Muskegon, and this young man had a sailboat also. Anyway, he was walking by our picnic table. We had a picnic table in front of our boat, and Sandy grabbed him by the arm and said, "Have you had anything to eat yet?" And he looked at her. He didn't know who she was. And she says, "Sit down and eat something with us." And he said, "Well, no, I'm going out to see some friends." His idea was he was going to go out and get drunk. And he said that, you know, Sandy saved my life. I was going to be, you never know, he says, what I was going to do with my life. But since that happened, my life has been changed. So this is some of the experience that we had. And the fellow that next door in a boat, he said too that if ever there was anybody that lived a Christian life, that had to be George, because I've never seen people act the way he does. I've never heard him swear. I've never heard him talk about people. I never heard him misuse anybody. He says, and here was a fellow that didn't go to church at all. That was his opinion. And I didn't know that, but he was telling that to a friend, and the friend told me. So these are some of the things that God uses when we don't even know it. So as we go about in life, you'll see some of the exciting things that happened. Look back at your own life and see how God has directed you. how he has changed you from what you really started out to be. I mean, I don't know what my life would have been like without Christ in my life. I have no idea. But he didn't even give me a chance to find out. He just led me into the way I had to go. Anything else?
George, your early grief experience led you to be passionate to walk with other people through grief with Grief Share. You want to tell us a little bit about how that prompted you to lead Grief Share here for so many years and
Well,
work through that?
as God leads us into different things, how do we know how we're going to be used? How do we know who we're going to come in contact with that really needs to hear this? You don't know who you're going to meet today, tomorrow, next week that really needs to know who Jesus Christ is. And that's the thing that gets me so much, is that we don't know who needs to hear about Jesus Christ and what he did for us. You realize that, we say he died on the cross for us, but he did more than that. He was resurrected into heaven to show us that we too will have the gift of going into heaven. I mean, it's not that we just expect Jesus Christ to save us and that's it. No. What did he say to us when he told Peter? He says, "Peter, do you love me?" And what did Peter say? "Lord, you know I love you." And he said, "Feed my sheep." Now, what does that mean? It means keep everything else into me because I have enough? No. It means share with other people so that they can hear what Jesus Christ has done in their lives. Probably the greatest thing that I ever did was when I was invited to church and I accepted Christ. That was the greatest thing in my whole life. It was something that we never expected. I mean, when I went to church the first time, I didn't know anything about the church. They talk about catechism. They talk about the Heidelberg Catechism, and they talk about different things about church there. I have never even heard of it, but yet God used it right there to change us. So you don't have to be a theologian to be able to invite somebody to church. Nancy proved that. So it's not me. No matter what we can say, you might think that, yeah, I am such a great person because of this. No, I'm just a simple carpenter that has been used by God in different ways. I'm just happy that I could be doing that. I hope that it will help people to look at their lives so that they can realize what God has done, how he's directed them, their footsteps in almost every way. It just is, I think of almost 60 years of marriage with Sandy. It was only 9 days before our anniversary. It was 7 days before her birthday when she passed away. But she passed away in such a nice, slowly quiet, just slowly stopped breathing and knowing that God was carrying her into heaven. And she would be with Jesus Christ from then on. And that was that was a blessing for me to be able to see that what she had done, how God took care of her through the whole thing. Probably had her have a place to be while I was having this operation on my foot. I mean, it's amazing. And these aren't just coincidences like people say, oh, that just happened. It just didn't happen. It just was directed. And we just got to realize that. Not that I'm a preacher. I'll probably never will be and never want to be. But my life has been just the life of Christ. And a lot of it has been, you know, I think of our kids too. Sandy did such a great job of bringing them up. And she took the two boys that were 2 and 4 at the time. And then when we were married, she took them as their own children and raised them that way and loved them that way. And her parents did the same thing. I mean, it's, you know, people talk about, well, that's a God thing. Well, that was a God thing. How did we know? Just all the steps that God put me through to be able to be to this point in my life, to be grateful for His direction. I hope everybody that hears this will realize it, that this is what it is. It's God's direction, not mine. Anybody else have anything to ask?
You started carpentry when you were doing all hand saws, right? You used to cut everything by hand, didn't you?
Oh yeah, when it first started,
Yeah.
we'd file our own saws and everything else after working all day long and cutting with our hand saws. At night when we get home, we'd file our saws so they'd be sharp again for the next day.
That's something.
Cut your rafters and you cut the ceiling joists, and when you put your deck down, that was always lumber, either 1x8s or 1x6s or 1x10s, whatever you could get a hold of, and trimming the edges and trimming them. You always put them on a 45 because that kind of strengthened things.
They don't build them like that anymore, do they?
No, and you know, it's a good thing that things have progressed, because the reason why is that we can't live in the past.